Thank you very much, Richardson, Ovbiebo, for being here in conversation with me today. My name is Temitayo Ogumbi, and I'm a visual artist who curates and writes. Richardson, gosh, it's been a long time since we've known one another. And it's a great honor to have this opportunity to speak to you about your work.
Mine as well.
So to begin, I wanted to read this quote, actually. It's at the end of the text written by Toby Onobulu, where you say, "Whatever I am doing now has existed before. We are not in a vacuum, so it's important to connect to roots. Everything has roots." And I want to use that quote to segue, or to return to the beginning of your practice as I encountered it about 11 years ago. I would like you to speak about the motifs that continue to anchor your practice, chiefly the bicycle, the home, the bust, and the materials that you use to get us into this conversation.
Okay.
So we can start with the bicycle.
First, let me thank you. Thanks for being the dear one, fan, friend, supporter. You've always helped me shape perspective of my work, which is very good. I always go back to your writings to gain a better perspective of what I do. So I'm very happy, very honored to be having this conversation with you. I would like to thank Bloom for making this possible as well, because I know it took a lot to get you here. So
No, it didn't.
So I'm grateful. Thank them. So thank you. And to everybody who's made our time to be here. My experience with materials will start with the studios I've worked, and I always, outside being a student or outside graduating from Ugoma College of Technology, and all of those people, those great people who's, working there and making sure that people learn things properly and, putting their best foot forward every day. Learned quite a lot from them, but also I've had personal experience with different artists in the studios. I always start to say Francis Denedo, and I will say I worked with Mr. Oluwamoda, and I worked with Kainebi and the DK, and then Mr. Ade Adekola. So those are like majorly the studios I knew I really spent time, and all of these people, to a very interesting extent, are about all of these things, about materials, about object, the quality of the work, the narratives. All of those things helped in how I perceived, materials, how I perceived art itself, and how I learned into making artworks. Although again, interesting, I made them at different times, so it was like I was growing, and I was growing into them, So each one made me at a point, and then, I was like, okay, so I hear, okay, this is how to move next, to where I am now. And so I'm really grateful to all of them, all of these studios. I would say material exploration would start basically from Oluwamoda's studio, Waterside Studio. Oluwamoda is a very material-based artist who plays a lot with materials. And when I was leaving school, I was going for a project, I think it was residency in the US. So he sent me, so it wasn't around when I graduated, so he sent me the names of two artists who I went with to the north, to Lhasa. Brian Kuzi and Rodine, And upon reading Brian Kuzi and Rodine, I realized that, Rodine was more like what I studied in school, but Brian Kuzi was more like what Oli was doing, because Brian Kuzi was very object-based as well. Brian Kuzi has a quote where he said, "Do not make material speak your language. Take them to a point where others can understand your language." So Brian Kuzi has that kind of interest in materials. Maybe not like we do it now, but as against Rodine, Brian Kuzi was more material-based. And then upon reading Brian Kuzi, I stumbled on Kiss, which was something that Brian Kuzi, Rodine, and then this guy was his name now. The guy who made the clothespin.
Klaus Oldenburg.
Klaus Oldenburg, yeah. Oldenburg made Kiss, but his clothespin was a reference of the Kiss, So again, looking at these three people making three different works, on one subject matter was something that was quite interesting to me because, you know, I was reading these two people and I saw Odenberg. And then I saw Duchamp. And then I was already stuck in the north. I had to make work. So Uche James River said, look, you can't come back and not make anything. Because I think he served in Konduga, which is not very far from where I served. And then one of my trips to Lagos, Madam BC said, look, you have to do stuff as well, you know, because I always go back to BC every time, you know. And so I went back and I saw this old abandoned factory and warehouse that was now occupied by an old man who was repairing all the bicycles in the village. So I just went to him and I said, look, this is what I want to do, and so I made those fests, you know. I started making this body of work, and that's what I started a blog and I wrote stuff about it. Got to the village, local canteen, they gave me their cans, and I was experimenting and making stuff, playing, you know. So my material experimentation started basically through these processes, and the wheels were something I picked up from the North, reading, you know, having all these conversations of looking at what Ulula Mada was doing, looking at what Rodin was doing, looking at what Brancusi, looking at what Duchamp was doing, you know, with objects and all the text that went into it, you know. And then I started reading up and saw that there were other artists who were also, Doris Salcedo, all of these people were also, you know, playing and touching these materials in this way. And I felt something interesting, so I started working with them. And some of those materials stuck with me till now. Interesting, some I really don't know exactly why. I think as I grow, I probably will be able to understand why more, you know. But for now, every other time the meanings keep getting refined and redefined for me, and I find a better use for them.
So when you encounter a material, thank you for that, by the way. That was really, I learned some things I didn't know before. When you encounter a material, would you say you're more drawn to the formal aspect or the conceptual potential of the material? The wheel, for example. Did you look at it formally and think this shape is something that is pleasing to my eye? Or were you thinking more about the conceptual connotations that could be extracted from the form?
Well, it's both. I remember having a class, I was part of a class that Jess Castellot instituted some years ago, and it was about beauty. And he was always saying one thing to me, say, Richardson, you know, I think that art should embody its meaning, you know. The object should, you know, you should pay attention to the object like you paid to, because he felt I was very interested in the, you know, what I was, my narrative, but I was not very interested in the object, you know. So, but he felt that, he said, look, I think art should embody its meaning. And then when I met Mr. Adekola, and I was feeling, that was a flogging class, you know. You know, you go worse with that. You know, but, you know, so boys, I mean, so I get very interested in both now, because I think that what you see first is the object. You know, it has to, you know, there has to be some level of pull, and then you then get interested in the meaning. And yeah, for me, that's it. So I'm very interested in the object itself, and I'm very interested in the narrative, with the circles, you know, the wheels, with the materials, all of them. Yeah.
Interesting to know. Thank you for that. Another motif I'd like you to speak about is the home, the house.
Okay.
It has appeared in your work formally as a house that people can recognize, but you've also used the language of housing, specifically in Lagos, in your work. So I'd love for you to speak a bit about that motif for us.
Okay, my work started off as people and the community that they inhabit. You know, so it's always about people and their spaces. It's always about people and their spaces. And then it became people, the spaces, the objects they use in defining and redefining the space, and then time, because time helps us to understand this evolution that, you know, this human interaction with space. And so it's always almost like a third-person perspective to these things, like to say, this is how, you know, this community deals with this. You know, but then, you know, as I kept dealing on those subjects, I realized that everything is narrowed down to the home, you know, as the smallest unit. It starts from there, you know. So in a bid to draw down into that, I began to narrow down into people like Doris Salcedo. You know, it says that you see, when you look at an architecture, a piece of building, what you see first is, you know, the architecture, and then with your mind, your heart, you know, you can tell that this is a home, it's a house, for example, and then with your emotions, you can make it a home, you know. So those kind of discussions and how she herself plays with that narrative helped me narrow down into that. And because I started dealing with the home as a space now, then the objects started popping up. Because like I was saying earlier, the houses were not really huge, you know, they were not very in your front before, they were just more like lines or in text, you know. But now I'm making them into like, because again, I'm narrowing down into that. I mean, I like to see how long that stays though. Might change.
Me too. And so speaking of the houses, this texture that you've imposed on the surface, can you tell us what it is, where it came from, and why you wanted to associate it with these house forms?
Okay, when I make work, part of my work process is that to make the next space interesting, because it has to also be interesting for me. I like to study what I'm doing now. And for that to happen, I believe in accident and design, which means that as you make your work, I think it's Professor Gani Adutogun that, you know, has that kind of, so as you make your work, when there are errors or when things happen, you pay attention to them so that you can see how far you can go with them. Maybe there's something there. So I think in one of my work or learnings, I realized that when people try to make concrete slab, not every time though, but sometimes when you're trying to make a concrete slab, you put nylon and floor plastic, and you know, with the mold, and then you cast it. But by the time you flip it, you have these textures behind. I felt the textures were interesting, and I felt that there was stuff that I could put, you know, use to make the work. It just felt interesting to me. You know, that I felt that they had any other meaning than, you know, the aesthetic appeal, and the fact that they were something that were part of architecture itself, you know, that I gleaned from that whole work process.
No, it's interesting to think about that hidden flaw coupled with the idea of home. And home, that flawed potential idea of home being associated with a building block of community and of family. So I would love for you to speak a bit more about how you transition from the idea of an individual home in your work to community.
Or from community to the individual home.
Or the other direction.
Well, I like I said, you know, in a bid to look at the community, you look at it to a point and you realize that you are going too far in trying to understand how communities are imagined or reimagined if you don't look at the home. A home is a place of collective, of personal, collective, shared experience, which becomes memory, which becomes history. So history, as we know it today, started from a home, somebody's home, some people's home, you know, and then every home is constructed based on these narratives, you know. So if you're going to talk about the community, you have to talk about how people lived first in their private spaces and how they allow that to translate into their environment, or how they allow that to influence, you know, their neighbors, and then the man next building, and then the man on the streets, and then the man, you know. So you have to at the end of the day, you have to still come down to that. So I think where that transition happened was where, you know, I was trying to interrogate, you know, the communities, and I realized that there's the need to go back, you know, into this starting point, which is the home, smallest unit, but it's the most important and the most powerful, because all of those narratives starts from there.
And so do you consider these sculptures with multiple homes as representing communities or representing time with respect to an individual or family moving from one home to the next?
For me, the idea of them coming together was stacking them. It's when you have like for example, we are in a block of flats now, and I think that this space is a home, all right, and then the next flat is another home. You know, how do you translate that? You're going to make a piece, you know. So So it's like me taking one home, I take another home, and I'm trying to juxtapose them. But then I'm thinking that what I'm talking about and what I'm doing is heavy. You know, we're talking about all of these things is, you know, is strong. But then you want to have a space where you can play. And how do you play? So I try to take it from a child's mind. And this is something, again, that I've learned from almost all the artists I've ever had to work with. They always spoke about that. They just shared it in different ways. We'll talk about a child's mind from the perspective of the object. You know, Mr. Dekala will talk about the child's mind from the perspective of colors. You know, and all of this, when you infuse it together, then you start having things like this. because is that rigor of trying to make something that is very heavy light. You know, but then as you peel it like an onion, you begin to see how heavy really it is. But it's really, you know, you want to come to it from a playful perspective, from a playful standpoint, because I want to play as I make my work. I want to enjoy it.
We could tell. So you mentioned color.
Yeah.
Tell us about your use of color. Tell us about how you choose the colors you choose to incorporate. I mean, I feel this is one of your more colorful exhibitions.
Yeah.
You know, you've departed from primary and secondary colors and are now getting into gradients like the one behind us, like in the work behind us. Can you tell us about that decision?
I think how I started going more into colors will have been Mr. Adekola again. Every time I do presentations to him, because I mean, I've been very fortunate to have people like him have my time and say, oh, okay, you know, come show me what you want to do, or sometimes say, can you come? Then they will drive down and see, and then every time he looks at the work, he says, put colors on this thing now. Are you scared of the colors? And then sometimes if I feel like I used to feel scared, why not just take it to Photoshop? You know, take the object to Photoshop or take it to one app and then throw colors on it and then see how it looks, and you know, just kept encouraging me. So I think I struggled, you know, because most of my work I always saw them from either from the raw finish or having it dark, because I felt they needed to be solid, and I didn't want to have too many color play in it, you know. But I think from his advice, I gradually started introducing them, and for now I'm enjoying them. I don't know if I'll change again, but you know. But I know that, I mean, one of the challenges I've encountered is that when you begin to make work with multiple colors, then you hit different cultures, and then you begin to understand that colors have meanings to people. And I mean, for you it might just be play, but for somebody it's a way to tell your state of mind, or it's a way to tell if you, it's like people trying to decode you through the colors you use. Is it trying to tell us it belongs to a group? Is it trying to tell us, you know, people just try to associate those colors and relate them to different forms of meaning. Sometimes positively, sometimes very negatively. You know, so it's a very interesting point. You know, but again, I'm not that. I just keep playing with my colors because I think, you know, they're interesting.
I think that's that I like the openness that you have to using color, and I like that you're not overthinking it and allowing others' perceptions of color to bring meaning to the colors you choose to use. I think it's rare. I think a lot of times color is imposed on work with a lot of meaning, and it's nice that you give the viewers room to. There was
I think a few times I've tried to use colors and add meanings to it. There was once I made, there was a sculpture I made, Clan, you know, I initially titled it In the Pink, and that was shortly after I lost my dad, because, you know, I was going to make that work, and I was thinking about him, and I was, you know, so I was going to use this pink, and I felt that I needed to have a reason. So I went on Google and I checked, and I realized that In the Pink actually meant, you know, related with health, you know, to have good health, sound health, and that was just shortly after, or it was even during COVID, shortly after COVID, you know. So so it was big. I mentioned it to Madam Ugoma. I think she was the only one I had that discussion with, and after that I erased it. Even when she asked later for the title, I didn't put it. because I didn't want to have to continue to create a narrative where I would use colors to define my work, you know. But that was one work that I tried to use color to, you know, I attached meaning to the color.
And you took it, you withdrew it.
And I withdrew it.
Can you tell us about the gold that you've used in this exhibition? I don't know that I've seen gold in your work before now, certainly not in this quantity, between the gold dye bond and also the gold paint that you've used on the wheels.
I think the gold will come from, I've used the gold more on the halos, the halo series.
Okay.
And that's because, again, in reference, when you see the paintings of halos, of pictures with halos, mostly it's always gold, you know. So I think I was just trying to reference that, basically, and I just flowed with that. It didn't question it, it didn't push, you know, too much. Only maybe on few occasions, like that piece, the one with the yellow, I felt that the gold would be too much. I just changed it to white. Yeah, I said no. I think it's just the white is going to be a better contrast to this one. And I struggled, but I left it, you know, because sometimes you paint. The way I make some of this work is that I just make them. I don't paint. I don't spray them. I don't paint them. And then after making them, I do like a color coding on them. I just match them. So with this, I'm going to have these 5 layers of houses. I'm going to put the base is going to be this color. So I label them, write it out, tag it, and I wait for the spray day. But then when we start spraying, things always change. So I will just leave it, because again, like I said, there is no attachment to. I'm not referencing the work. I'm using the colors to reference the work, and so I'm just trying to enjoy, you know, that color play on it. You know, so there are certain parts that, you know, retains their color, but a lot of times a lot of the colors change. I mean, except the halos.
Okay, fair enough. The mirror and reflective surfaces is another formal attribute of your work. I wanted you to perhaps share something about today.
You know, the mirrors I guess I must have picked that mirror from Mr. Olomoda's studio again, because the first time I used the mirrors I created this like replicas of skyscraper, lifeline, with copper wire. At the time I was trying to, you know, I was talking about trade and how even from colonial eras, you know, mirrors was one of the objects used for trade, you know, and then now we have you see big buildings that are like trading points, and they are also reflecting, but a lot of times those buildings really reflect what they're reflecting doesn't seem to be like what they stand for, so to speak, at that time, but it is changing now. So you know, so I was just playing with that, you know, that narrative. But I remember the first time I made one at home, my dad came and saw it and said, upon completing it, he said, Richardson, don't invite Olokun to our house. And now, you know, so we just laughed it off. So I have this book from the Amatan workshop, the first one I attended, I think it was 2022, and Professor Agberia has the text in it. It was critiquing Professor Buzanabakwaya's shrine installation. And one of the things in it is the mirror, one of his shrine installations. And so it was referenced, and he referenced it to the Olokun shrine, the meaning of. So that's where I saw it, that, oh, so truly, my dad, I mean, different generations experience things different, you know. I didn't see shrine installations like he did, like Dr. Bruce did, you know. So I don't relate my work with them that way. But again, doesn't mean that those things didn't exist. And so within the Olokun shrine, the mirror actually stands for strong visionary power. Yes, that's because all these objects have relative meanings within. They're not just thrown into space. All those objects have what they. So, but from his text, that's what it means. You know, again, it's references what I was talking about with the work. You know, visionary power is trying to see the future or create stuff that will build the future. And so with time, that, you know, helped me. I kept using it in my work because I felt that, to an extent, we are reflections of our environment. You know, we are reflections of our immediate environment. The possibilities, the opportunities we see. How do we see it? How do we negotiate them? You know, And so I was using the mirrors as a material. I didn't want to say as a metaphor because people used materials as a metaphor a lot. But I mean, to an extent, we use them as metaphors for these things, you know. So like I made this piece and I have gold. I've made this particular one. It's called Dreams in Gold.
Dreams in Gold.
I mean, this is the first time I'm making first body of work I'm doing that has a lot of female themes in it. And this one was talking about girl child. And then they had their dreams are golden. It's like trying to encourage them. But I mean, it's just my own little voice adding to the interesting international narrative or conversation that's going around. So it's not like it's new, but just just adding mine, to that narrative. But again, I made the work from 2017, 2018. That's when I had the cut.
Okay.
But I didn't do the work. I didn't finish it. So I just kept it. So when I was going to do this show, I wanted to show it. So I didn't want to have it this way. What I was going to do before was have text, or get people to write within text with the board, and but then I just finally decided to settle down for the golden reflective mirror in it, because again I wanted us to see ourselves within the process of this girl child. Like to say, in what way are we deterring? In what way are we contributing? I can remember one of the pieces I used again, and I think that would have come from a piece I made in 2018 for my show in museum. And after I made the piece, Mr. Dekola came for the studio visit, and I saw it and said, "No, Richardson, this work, this now we're going to end it." That was Blind Spot, where we have the girl and the mother in the seat, and I said, "No, we have to make people know that they are part of this problem." So it got me to construct mirror as the base of the work. So the sculpture was sitting on mirrors. So when you come close, you see yourself in it. And I think that every time we talk about these things, we always talk about them from a third-party perspective. Like we are not in it. It's not our business. They are the ones causing the problem. But sometimes you need to see yourself in it and say, in what ways am I contributing to this? In what ways am I, helping the situation? So I think as I grow, like I said, the mirrors, all these objects begin to hold a different meaning to me. So I use them differently now, as against the way I used them before. I don't just use them, and I'm quite selective how I use them now. But again, different ways.
You spoke